Believe it.
You have to turn it off, turn it back on. It's just anytime it's
First time. Okay, there we go. Thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. It is that time. I know not everybody's here. We'll have some come and go. Got informational only statutory meeting here today to review some of the audits from Senate Bill 6. So we'll call this meeting to order, and I believe, Chairman, you willing to open us up in a word of prayer?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If y'all would pray with us. Lord, we do thank you for this great day you've given us. We thank you for the great state of Georgia, and help us to zero in on things that would benefit our citizens in our state. We thank for the members of this committee and the members in the audience that are so diligent about coming and helping us work together. We ask that you be with our families back home, our children and our grandchildren, keep them safe while we're gone, and bless everything we do in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. That's a very important look back over some of the things that have been put in place over the years and what we may see with regard to these audits. I do want to thank Matt Taylor and his team for being here today and helping put these together. I'm going to recognize you to get us started, and I know you have a team that worked on this. Also, before we get started, we just so everybody knows, Shay Johns has joined the team. She is our intern this year in Ways and Means, so she's going to be fantastic. Shay, welcome. And our AA down there, Evelyn Hamilton, is kind of a veteran of this building, so or the Capitol building, and she knows her way around. But we are excited to have her over at Ways and Means too. She's outstanding. So, Mr. Taylor, your show, sir. Thank you.
Okay, mic working fine? All right. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here, inviting us to speak about the tax incentive evaluations that were completed in 25. So I wanted to give just a really quick overview of the state law that guides this report process. We've done these for 4 years now. First year was after the passage of Senate Bill 6. Originally, under Senate Bill 6, chairs of Ways and Means and Senate Finance could request up to 5 reports each year. The law required these reports to include net economic activity, state revenue, state expenditures, and the public benefit, if any. And we were required to contract for this work. After an RFP process, we contracted with Georgia Southern, Georgia State University, and the University of Georgia. So then Senate Bill 366 passed in 24. That allows chairs to request up to 6 reports each. It also includes some automatic reviews of sunsetting tax incentives if they cost more than $20 million. In addition to the information that was already required to be in these reports, they're supposed to also add things like, has the purpose of the incentive been met? Consider other ancillary impacts in comparison to other states. And some of these things were in the reports previously, but this put it in statute. The Department of Audits is also required to publish a list of topics on our website after we get the list, and we collect written comments from interested parties, and that's passed along to the researchers to use while they're doing their analysis. So this is the list of the requests that we received from the 2 committees this past year. We got 12 requests, 6 from each chamber. We'll discuss all 12 of them today, or the researchers from the universities will discuss all 12 today. You'll see income tax credits there, including several that are related to donations that are not necessarily for economic development purposes primarily. Some sales tax exemptions. I believe that we're up over 40 of these reports in the last 4 years now. So before I turn it over to the researchers to discuss those 12, I just wanted to briefly describe the economic impact section of the reports. That's what gets talked about a great deal. The researchers, and I've gone over this in prior years, some of you may be familiar with it, they typically use M-Plan to determine certain measures like jobs, labor income, the value added to the economy, and economic output. And you can see in the slide that it does include what is called the ripple effect by some people. It's the direct companies that benefit, their suppliers, and then the employees of the suppliers in those direct companies and how they spend the money that they receive, their wages. And then there's an important point in these reports is often the but-for percentage. This analysis, this is because not all activity that occurs in an industry is associated and results because of the incentive. And this is what this percentage is trying to get at. So if you think about, we have a grocery sales tax exemption in Georgia. If we did not have that, we would still buy groceries. I mean, we would still eat. So if you are evaluating that particular exemption, you are trying to determine how that changes demand and how that changes the economy. So it would not be, you would not consider in jobs everybody that works at a grocery store, for instance. So that would be a basic example. And while we're discussing the importance of the but-for, I wanted to take the opportunity to address the data center report summary that many of you probably saw, the corrected summary that the Department of Audit sent out yesterday. The primary issue with the summary that was originally created was we had not applied the but-for percentage to the numbers. So the report from UGA was correct. They had assessed, determined the overall impact of the industry. Those are the numbers that we had in the summary. What we should have done at the Department of Audits is applied the 30% but-for. And so that's what we did. We went back and multiplied those numbers by 30% because UGA had determined that 30% of the activity was due to the exemption, not 100%. So they'll talk more about that report later. But basically what these reports are supposed to do is not determine what's going on in an entire industry, but to determine what is being caused by the incentive. And so that's why those numbers changed. But again, the report did not change. It was only the summary of the report that we created. So let's see. I also wanted to bring up some limitations to consider with these reports. So it's not every incentive has a primary purpose of economic development. I mentioned the grocery sales tax exemption. I mean, that is not passed to spur economic development in the same way something like job tax credit may be. And then we have tax credits that we're going to talk about today that are related to donations to nonprofit entities, and those may not all have a primary purpose of economic development. So there are other components of these reports that may matter more than things like jobs and labor income. And you'll see some very low numbers for those, but there may be another purpose that those credits were created. The researchers attempt to determine if the incentives are accomplishing their purpose as required, but the purpose is not always clearly stated in law. I mean, it rarely is explicitly stated, so it's generally implied. They're trying to determine what the purpose of the incentive is. And then another limitation is that the changes in economic and fiscal activity, this is a relatively short period. So it doesn't consider anything like the reputation of the state and really long-term decisions that may be made. So that's just another consideration that's more specific to the economic aspects. So and now I can turn it over to the researchers.
Yeah, no, please do, Matt. I was just going to
Okay.
notify the committee that, we're going to have another opportunity to take a deeper dive on this. I've talked with Chairman Huffstedler, so I know we start losing some people starting around 2 o'clock. I'll be here for as long as it takes you to get through these, but, if we have some burning questions, please try to get them out, but we will have another opportunity to engage on these later. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
An intro.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Peter Bluestone with the Georgia State Fiscal Research Center. I'd just like to take a minute and acknowledge my team here who helped out immensely on all these. It's a lot of work, and they really did a great job all through the year last year. So if you have any really tough questions, I may look to them to try to backstop me here. All right. So we did 6 tax credit evaluations. 5 of them were fairly similar in that they were income tax credits that allowed taxpayers to donate money to a specific charity, like foster care, for instance, or the Peach tax credit for education, and they would get a credit on their income tax. So essentially, it's a shift from going into the state general fund, for instance, and instead directly into this charitable organization. So in that sense, they're analyzed similarly. The mechanisms for how we analyzed the changes in behavior for taxpayers was similar. They did have different but-for causation estimates. Some of them we estimated did not change behavior at all. And some of them we did find changes in behavior. For a lot of these, the goal is to increase donations or increase funding to these places, such as rural hospitals. And so in some of these instances, you'll see that there was a great, if you looked at the report, you'll see there was a great uptick in rural hospital donations. But what we're concerned about when we're looking at these but-for estimates is a substitution effect, right? Taxpayers could be funding hospitals broadly in their donation portfolio, and then they are made aware of this new credit, and so they might switch their giving from formerly unqualified urban hospital in their area now to a rural hospital. And so that's a general pattern in these types of analysis, right? Are we seeing a real uptick in donations, or are we seeing a substitution from what was formerly an unqualified provider of services to now a qualified provider? So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. There's a lot of detail on these slides, and I'll just try to hit the highlights. The descriptions are fairly similar in terms of the amount of qualifying, the amount that qualifies for the credits. There is one that's slightly different, the employer-sponsored child care tax credit. That functions differently than the others. That's geared towards employers rather than individuals, and it's a fairly complex credit. I'll just say right now that we find, due to the complexity of the credit and the limitations for tax planning, that we don't see that moving the needle in terms of providing additional child care options for people. Essentially, what we find is that employers do participate, but it is limited, and that due to the other options that employees have available to them, a lot of them prefer to participate in other plans, particularly flexible spending account plans, which offers them different choices, and they're not just tied down to one center. So again, we see, the purpose of that is to encourage employers to provide child care. We do see that they do that, but we don't see that it changes the behavior of the amount of child care spending in the state. Again, it's a substitution effect, albeit small. Qualified education expense tax credit. Again, the purpose of this is not explicitly identified in the statute, but again, it's likely to increase access to private schools. And in the report, we found that particularly, the mic, am I standing too close? Maybe a little farther away? Okay. We find that, stand closer? Okay, that's a perfect spot. All right, I'm gonna put my hands down, maybe that'll brace me. We find that, in fact, this program does provide for more low-income and minority participation in private schools. But because of the challenge in estimating essentially the switcher rate, I'm sure you all are familiar with that term. Essentially, it's the idea that, does the credit actually induce somebody to go to a private school, and without the credit they wouldn't. That's something very hard to estimate. There's been a lot of work done in that area, but there's been no conclusive estimates. So for our work, what we did was we tried to essentially balance the switcher rate so that essentially the cost to the state and the benefits to the state even out. And that's consistent with other work that's been done in this area, again, because of the difficulty in actually observing the switcher rate. You'll find in the report it's roughly 60% is a switcher rate. Rural hospital tax credit, that's to strengthen the financial stability of rural hospitals. And again, as I mentioned, we did find that there was certainly increased giving to rural hospitals. And we did find, again, that there is a but-for element here. We used the location based on Department of Revenue data and the IRS 990 forms to figure out where the donations were coming from throughout the state based on a metro area. And so we were able to find that a lot of the donations, roughly 45% or so, were coming from Metro Atlanta. So we deemed that those were really just a substitution effect, right? These were folks that before the credit, gave to Metro Atlanta hospitals, and now some of their giving was directed towards these rural hospitals. But we did find that roughly 14% of all giving was located in rural counties, rural areas not in an MSA. And so we deemed that that was new donations, right? That these people were motivated by the credit, had not priorly gave to their rural hospitals, and so 14% was new donations from rural areas. There's also a group, roughly 42% or so, in the smaller MSAs around the states, the Columbuses, the Albanys, and Macon, and places like that, that have abut rural counties. There's perimeter, and then there's rural counties. And so we estimated, again, that roughly 14% of those donations that were given to rural counties could be considered new donations. So the but-for the rural counties for these hospitals is 28%, right? So 28% of that 75 million cap is considered new giving. Qualified law enforcement donation credit. This purpose is to strengthen local public safety efforts. Here again, we did find a small but-for, and with the idea, we looked at data prior to the program and data during the program, and we did see an uptick in donations. One of the interesting things about this credit is it's primarily driven by donations to Metro Atlanta foundations, and there's caps on the amount that you can give to each foundation. And so in the report, we discuss ways perhaps that you could spread that out and maybe increase donations by changing that a little bit. But we did find that donations increased for this program. Qualified foster child care donation. Again, this is to support aging foster children and justice-involved youth. So there is a substantial amount of organizations in this space, and they have existed for a while. So we looked at the programs prior to the credit and that were not qualified, and then after the credit with programs that were qualified, and we could not discern a difference in giving. So for this one, there is a zero but-for, right? Essentially, there was no additional giving. It was just a substitution effect from prior unqualified organizations to now qualified organizations. But in the foster care space, giving did not increase. The Peach Education Tax Credit to support innovation in K-12 public education. Here again, we did find a small but-for increase in this spending. This is a tough space, as you all know. If you have kids, there are a ton of options to give and get donations, get a deduction for your donation to your school your kid goes to, and so this is, we did find a small increase, but again, with the idea that most taxpayers with kids are likely to support their own, and this is not in a way. This is a broad credit which people don't exactly know where it's going. Okay, so here's just some comparisons with other states. Many of these programs are similar to programs in other states. The exception being the Qualified Foster Care Program and the Peach Education Tax Credit, as well as law enforcement. Those three are different, but other states do have a similar rural hospitals, qualified education expense, and the employer-sponsored child care tax credit. In terms of meeting the incentives, I kind of talked about this a little bit already. So again, there is a difference between the but-for and the meeting of the purpose. For instance, again, rural hospitals, the but-for was 28%, but again, it did definitely increase by considerably more than that the amount going to rural hospitals. So the goal of funding rural hospitals was met, but again, that was most, 70% or so due to shifts in giving. But to the extent that rural hospitals and the communities around them were beneficiaries of that giving, that's also part of the goal of the program, and so that was also met. And again, these others did fairly well, perhaps with the exception of the Qualified Foster Child Donation Credit, but it's a relatively new credit, and we do expect it to grow and participation to increase. So here are the incentive results. And again, when you see a 0 and a cost per job not applicable, that is because of that 0 but-for assumption, or not assumption, estimate. When there is no change in behavior, if the credit were not to exist and the activity would still exist, right, we don't relate any economic activity to that. So for instance, for rural hospital tax credit, for the revenue foregone, this includes the but-for share, right? There's 232 jobs created at a cost per job of roughly $300,000. And again, the purpose here is to provide additional funds to rural hospitals to the extent that was successful, right? But the but-for says, was this new? And that's what that's measuring, the new part. Same thing with qualified law enforcement. You've got an additional 127 jobs, and then for the Peach Education Credit, about 30 jobs. And again, that's a small credit, but it is growing. It's about $5 million. Here is the value added. This could be considered, the equivalent of the gross state product. What these programs add to the state in terms of economic activity broadly. And again, this is just analyzing the but-for portion. So with the ones that have, again, are 0 because they are not deemed to change behavior. This is looking at new state revenue. Again, this is the but-for share, so these are relatively small numbers. But again, most of these were not deemed to be economic development incentives, rather to foster changes or increased giving to certain public charitable groups that provide services to people. Some other points, and again, I kind of touched on these a little bit earlier. For the employer-sponsored child care tax credit, again, it's a complex program. It's hard to effectively tax plan because you have to spend the money up front and then figure out how much of it qualifies for the credit, and that will vary based on the income of your employees and other things. And there are some notes in the report that suggest how maybe that could be changed a little bit to make it a little bit more useful. For the other qualified donation credits, one of the things that was of interest that we were told early on was particularly for the qualified education expense tax credit, there is a gap between the credit cap and the amount of actual donations, historically, the cap would be reached very quickly in the matter of days when the program opened, but not all of those donations were realized. And so we had conversations with the Department of Revenue, and they're aware of that, and they have put a program in place starting in tax year 26 that will allow the Department of Revenue to assess the actual donations right around September 1st, I believe. I have this in my notes here. September 15th, they'll be issuing a report saying how many donations have actually been met or given, and then the difference between those donations given and those donations, that have not been made, they'll allow new donations to be made to reach that cap. So they'll essentially take out the ones that people have. There'll be a deadline for you to make your donation if you've applied for it, and if you haven't, then they'll reset that and allow new donations to be given, so that the cap can be reached. This is modeled somewhat after the success of the rural hospitals. The difference in the programs has to do with how many different entities are actually collecting donations and processing them. In the qualified education tax credit, different schools come together, or sometimes just one school, and they'll have a scholarship organization, and they'll collect these donations, but they don't coordinate amongst themselves. So everybody is interested in maximizing their own donations, but they don't have a way to say, oh, well, it turns out only, I collected 100, but only 70 of them gave. But in the case of rural hospitals, it's all administered by Georgia Heart, and so they are able to monitor very closely who has actually given, and they shepherd the applications through from the acceptance process to the actual donation process, and then they know who is either not going to donate as much as they thought or may not donate at all, and then they're able to solicit new donations to reach their cap. So this DOR process tries to mimic that, and DOR is going to act as the central organizing agent. One other thing that was of interest was trying to, and we wrote this up in the reports, trying to make some of the provisions in the reports in terms of carry forwards, in terms of administration, more uniform across these various credits. Again, the 5 credits that are all income tax based, and then the cap credits are all fairly similar, but the way they're administered and their individual provisions are slightly different. So it would help taxpayers and help administration if they're more similar. All right, that is our presentation. I think we were going to do questions immediately.
I think at the end, Dr. Bluestone, I thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Questions
We
at
were
the
going to bring Matt up at the end, and then get assistance from y'all, I think, at the end with questions, if that's okay. But
That's fine with me.
yeah, great job. Thank you so very much for being here today. Can you just tell us who we have next?
Hello, I am Ben McKay. I represent the Center for Business Analytics and Economic Research at Georgia Southern. Go Eagles!
All right.
Like to go ahead and acknowledge a couple members of our team here that were able to join us today. Dustin Denham and Lainey Harris, and Carrie Christian unfortunately had to stay in Statesboro for other obligations, so he was unable to join us today, but we're pleased to be here to talk about our two projects, both of which are sales tax credits. One focuses on on professional and laundry services, and the other one is the trade-in vehicle tax exemption. Both of these really are, in our view, were not economic developments per se. They were more focused on encouraging economic activity, and they perform that purpose fairly well given what they were how they were designed to work. When we looked at the personal and laundry services, because I know everybody's carrying this information around with them in their head right now, because everybody here knows the NAICS code so well. It's okay to laugh. Nobody does. So basically, what we have here is we have the personal care industry. So those would be barbershops, those would be beauty salons, nail salons, those sorts of activities. Death care services. So both morticians and funeral homes, in addition to cemeteries. And then we have dry cleaning and laundry services. So that's both coin-operated machines that you'd find at a laundromat, and those are also dry cleaning services. And then we also included within that personal care services. These are pet grooming, photo finishing, and parking lots. So generally, we use price elasticity of demand to figure out both of these, and to be able to isolate what the economic activity was within both of those. The idea. So as we kind of looked across at both of those. These are both fairly what would be termed inelastic industries. So they don't move very much based on price, because you're still going to need a car to get to work, or wherever it is you're going. You're still going to need to have a haircut every once in a while, or get the dog's nails cut. Those sorts of things are going to always be particular pieces of needs for individuals. So there's not a whole lot of substitution allowed within those. So as we looked more closely at the personal and laundry services, really about 80% of the economic activity within this focuses on the personal care and the laundry services part, and then the other services that made up about 80% of the industry, which fit with what we were expecting to find within that. For the trade-ins, this is the part where we kind of had a nifty little graphic. But generally speaking, you have your vehicle price. When you walk into the dealership, we solely focused on dealerships and those sorts of activities. You select the car, you do your negotiation, and then you take the price. You do the trade-in. The trade-in comes off the price of the vehicle, and then it's the net price afterwards that is taxed on the new vehicle. And what this does is it allows you to consumers to not pay the tax on the trade-in vehicle, and that stimulates a little bit of movement within the auto market as they go through that. If we look more specifically at what other states are doing, we had an we looked at this. It's really a mixed bag across the U.S. for personal and laundry services. In the contiguous states, both Georgia and Alabama don't tax services in this industry at all. And then the ones that did really focused in on the laundry and coin operated machines, and they kind of did a split with that. So coin operated tended to be exempted from all taxation, where if you had a person involved in the transaction, the tendency was, if it was going to be taxed, that's where it was taxed at. So if you brought your dry cleaning in, that would be taxed. You went to the laundromat and put a coin in the machine, nothing. And coin, again, is a relative term these days, so of course you could flap your card across it, and then that would work the same way. And then the other one were the personal laundry service, other personal services. So we saw dog grooming as one of those areas where we had a number of taxing of that, and that was kind of within the industry. So then the other one that when we looked at the vehicle trade-in tax exemption, there basically, if you have a consumption tax in the United States, you're most likely exempting this from all from taxation in that way. So only 3 states within that group actually had a sales tax applied to the trade-in that you made when you did your purchase. Just for the record, those are California, Hawaii, and Virginia. So kind of an odd mix across, but with some very unique characteristics within each one of those. Everybody else exempted the trade-in from the tax rate, and then the contiguous states, they were exempted to a certain, all exempted to a certain to a certain level across the industry. So as we kind of moved through the analysis, the other way that this really met the kind of standards that we were looking for was that it both avoided double taxation of on goods and services. So within the personal and laundry services, you had a lot of smaller companies that would have trouble dealing with a sales tax, and so by exempting that, you're increasing the economic potential of those small proprietorships. And in addition to that, you did have some small hospital laundry services and some other specific, highly specific washing of materials that were let's call it highly sensitive. So those would have a different impact across the way that these things would work within the economy going up to similar industries. The trade-in vehicles really, we, as most people in this room, I'm sure, remember the ad valorem personal property tax that was in place prior to this new system. This replaced that system. By doing that, it's allowed for a similar revenue collection, and it avoids the idea that we're taxing it once when it leaves the lot, and then we're not going to tax it again until it goes back into the system as a new vehicle or as a used vehicle, to be able to do that, because it's new depending on the dealer type in which we would be looking at. So those are the two big areas there with that. On the economic side, what we really did was kind of dug in using the but-for, like the remainder of our colleagues did, and we really tried to have a firm look at that. So what we found within this was about 166.6 million was foregone by the state for the personal and laundry care services portion of it, and that ended up with about 23,000 in return on that investment. This one had a little bit higher just because of the nature of the industry and the amount of small firms within it. The vehicle tax, we really tried to focus in. It's obviously a multi-billion-dollar industry in terms of car sales and how those sales work. We're talking about over the life of the credit that we looked at over the 5 years, like 1.6 million cars took advantage of that. Transactions took advantage of that tax exemption, but really there's a very small percentage of that that's actually attributed to the impact. The one area that we tried to account for, but it was a little challenging, was the idea that if you aren't doing the incentive, how much of the tax of the purchasing would result in people switching to a cheaper car or a cheaper price, because we can guarantee that not everyone is going to go, oh yeah, I can't wait to sell my car in the open market instead of doing the convenient trade-in at the dealership. So we did try and account for that somewhat, which is why the cost per job on this was so much higher, because there's just not a whole lot of elasticity there to be able to move it along. So that's why it's $340,000 per job, mostly because we still see activity taking place regardless. And then we kind of moved in and took another look at the value added side of things, and this created a pretty for one of them, for the personal laundry services, a strong kind of return on investment to the state economy of about $1.50 per investment, so per dollar spent. So it really ends up having a fairly strong movement through the economy, and that in terms of return, where the trade and tax exemption, again, because we had took a very narrow view of the automotive industry, ended up at about 50 cents per dollar spent. So there's a little bit of a difference there, but there's value outside of these from a non-economic development standpoint. So at any rate, we also went ahead and looked at what that would be for the state in terms of return. So we're talking about 6 cents on the dollar for revenue generated from the personal and laundry services, and then the and then the trade and tax exemption was also about 2 cents within that market. All right, so then our other points when we looked at these, the personal and laundry services definitely had a lot of micro businesses, so firms with less than 10 people, lots of independent contractor type arrangements. So there's a lot of opportunity here. There's a tax fairness issue in terms of trying to tax these particular services, because they are used by a lot of lower income individuals and across the group. And then the other one are the other states are just not taxing this industry as widely as others. So it's a very hodgepodge sort of environment when you look across the country in terms of how these are moving. And then and so the trade-in tax exemption was also avoiding that double taxation that we've talked about. A lot of the non-monetary benefits were a driver of the activity, trying to make sure that the cars are moving, and then keeping in line with other states, because again, very few states tax this part of the car purchasing transaction. So with that, I will turn it over to our friends at UGA and let them give you their rundown of their analyses. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McKay. UGA, go Dogs. All right,
Dogs.
let's go.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having me here today, for the opportunity to talk about the work we've done for the Department of Audits and Accounts. My name is Greg Wilson. I serve as an associate director at the Institute of Government, and I lead our economic analysis team, which conducted 4 studies for DOAA over the past 6 months or so. Here with me today is one of my colleagues, Jesse Justice, who helped with all the analyses. Dr. Tommy Shepard, who leads our economic analysis team. He was unable to be with us today. Broadly, you can think of our 4 provisions that we looked at in 2 buckets. The first bucket is thinking about services that are currently exempt from sales tax right now. Think of this just what Ben from Georgia Southern talked about in terms of the laundry exemption. These are similar to the ones we're talking about here today. And then the second bucket we're talking about is think of these more in the thought of economic development incentives that are encouraged to stimulate investment in the state of Georgia. So the first 2 covering services that aren't currently taxed right now. The first one would be the administrative and support services. And I like to think of these as services that help to drive the larger economy. These are things like office administrative support, facility support services, so cleaning of offices, temporary staffing services, security services, travel arrangement services, the services that really help to drive large facets of the economy. And these, of course, are currently not subject to sales tax. The second one we looked at was waste remediation, waste management and remediation services. And that one is really just what it sounds like. It's the collection, it's the management, it's the treatment and disposal of waste, household garbage, commercial garbage. And these are also not subject to tax as well today. Third one I want to talk about is the Manufacturers Incentive Tax Credit, or MITC, if I call it that today. This was first passed into law in 1994. It has been amended a number of times over the years. In its current form right now, manufacturers that have been operating in the state for at least 3 years and making a minimum investment purchase of $100,000 can qualify if they're making purchases of approved expenses. Things like land purchase, construction of a new building, renovations of buildings, purchase of existing buildings, used equipment as well. And they're allowed a income tax credit of 1% to 8%, depending on a variety of factors. One item I want to mention right up front here today is on the MITC. We faced data limitations on how the MITC was utilized in Georgia, and that did limit the depth of our analysis. If additional data were made available, we could certainly enhance the study further. Finally, the data center sales tax exemption. This was passed into law in 2018 here, and it exempts a portion of the construction services, materials, and also the purchases of server and other related equipment for data centers from our state and local tax in Georgia. There are minimum investment thresholds and job thresholds that have to be met. There's a sliding scale between more urban and rural parts of our state for this as well. And I did want to flag for the committee also that we did a similar study about 3.5 years ago for the Department of Audits and Accounts, and I'll talk about that briefly when I get to the end of my presentation. One other thing I should note is that since we did that initial study, data centers have really grown significantly in the state of Georgia, but also across the United States. So if we look at a comparison to other states' incentives, for our first two on the services, similar to what Ben had mentioned, most states don't tax services. So we're similar in that regard where, we're not taxing administrative services or waste management services, similar to other states. On the manufacturing investment tax credits, what we found there is that there are similar tax credits offered by other states. But really the difference is Georgia's is more structured with that 1% to 8% in various ways to earn, a larger income tax credit. And then also Georgia, compared to other states, has a lower floor. So the investment threshold for MITC in Georgia is $100,000. In other states, of course, it may be much larger than that. On the data center exemption, many states now have a data center exemption. Of course, the details do differ by state, of course, on that. So let's talk about purpose. As Matt mentioned, some of these, the purpose may not be fully clear in the law. When we look at whether they meet their purpose, generally I think the answer is yes, but maybe it's likely on a spectrum. The two service exemptions were found to marginally stimulate economic activity, and we can talk more about that. The manufacturer's investment tax credits, our analysis found that it increased spending on equipment and construction by about 1.34%. And the high-tech data center exemption study found that 30% of data centers in Georgia, the construction of them, could be attributed to this tax exemption. So what that means is that 70% of data centers constructed in the state of Georgia would have been built without this exemption. That was that but for that Matt mentioned at the start, and also when he was mentioning that one-page summary. So 30% can be attributed to the exemption, 70% would have been built likely without the exemption. So let's dive into some information around what we found on the incentives, a similar set of tables you've seen here already this afternoon. For the administrative and support services, the estimated net foregone revenue for the state of Georgia is around $1.14 billion. That industry, that exemption supporting 22,687 jobs at a cost per job of $50,196. So it's a larger industry compared to the second one, which is waste management exemption and remediation services. The state has a net foregone revenue of around $78.2 million, and the exemption supports around 405 jobs at a cost of about $193,000 per job created or supported. For the MITC, the net foregone revenue for the state totals out to about $144 million, supports 176 jobs at a cost per job of $816,000. Lastly, on the data centers, we found the net foregone revenue for the state of Georgia to be $432 million, supporting 10,000 jobs at a cost per job of $42,638. And on all these, the but-for assumption has been applied to these. So we know that this is only one facet of this. We can also look at value add, so what's being added to the state's, think of state gross domestic product. What we can think here is that the administrative support services tax exemption had a value add of around $1.64 billion, so that comes out to about $1.44 of economic growth for revenue foregone. Waste management and remediation services, the value add was $48.1 million. So that came out to about 60 cents of economic growth per dollar of state foregone revenue. For MITC, value add of $13.5 million, it's about 9 cents of economic growth per dollar of foregone revenue invested. And then for a high-tech data center exemption, it generated $1.25 billion in value add for the state. So when you take that, compare that to the foregone revenue, it's about almost $3 of economic growth per dollar of revenue foregone. When we look at state revenue and new state revenue generated, for administrative support services generated $52.2 million in new state revenue. So state revenue around 4 cents per dollar of foregone revenue. For waste management and remediation services generated about $1.5 million of new revenue. Around 2 cents. For MITC, about $500,000 in new state revenue, so about less than 1 cent of state revenue per dollar invested. And then for the high-tech data center equipment exemption, we found that generated about $41.5 million in new state revenue, or about 9 cents of state revenue for dollars invested. So I want to round out my presentation today by offering a couple other considerations that you'll find detailed in the reports. First thing I would say on the sales tax exemptions, the two that we studied here, these are common exemptions offered by most states. And as I mentioned, they really just kind of marginally stimulate economic activity in the state of Georgia. For MITC, I think it's again important to note the data limitations that really impacted the depth of our analysis on this work. If further data were available, we could expand or enhance the study on that. Other states have similar tax credits to Georgia's MITC. Georgia's, being how it, lost my train of thought, excuse me, y'all. Georgia's is more structured with a 1 to 5% based on tier status, and then the additional 3% is based on some specialized areas identified in code, like environmentally beneficial projects, defense spending, and then there's also some provisions related to rural. One thing that's really interesting when you look at Georgia's MITC versus other states is the much lower investment threshold. We posit thinking about that maybe that offers a lower barrier of entry to small and mid-sized manufacturers, where in other states the investment floor might be in the millions of dollars versus Georgia being at $100,000. When you think about the MITC, one other thing I think it's important to mention is that some of the investment categories in the MITC would generate little to no economic impact on the state of Georgia. So for instance, the purchase of land itself doesn't actually generate economic impact. Same with the purchase of existing buildings. We're really just swapping the title, to somebody else. Same thing with used equipment. And then even thinking about the purchase of new equipment to equip manufacturing, our research found that much of that equipment is produced outside of Georgia and even outside the United States. So that purchase necessarily isn't accruing additional economic benefits to the state of Georgia. Let's talk about data centers. As I mentioned, we did a similar study back in 2022 for the Department of Audits and Accounts we brought before this committee. The prior study attributed 90% of data center activity, data center construction to the exemption. As I mentioned earlier, in this study, we attribute 30% of data center construction to this exemption. There's probably the question of, why that change? And what we found is it's really largely due to the growth of data centers in Georgia and nationally. If you might recall, back in 2022, we did the study, the Department of Revenue had so few applications for the data center incentive, they weren't actually able to release any information on data centers in Georgia. So that gives you a sense of the growth in data centers really in the past 3.5 years. The economic impact for Georgia from data centers is largely generated by the construction of data centers. So the materials, the labor that's attributed to that. Nearly all of the servers and equipment is manufactured outside the state of Georgia. Much of it actually manufactured outside of the United States as well. So that same caveat that I made on MITC also applies to those equipment and servers. One thing I will note that you can find in the study as well is our team was asked to consider a little bit on local property taxes, kind of outside the traditional scope of the Senate Bill 6 studies. But there was some interest in understanding how do data centers interact with local property taxes. We weren't able to do a full workup in the study, but you'll find towards the back of the study, I believe it's around page 45 or 46, we did look at several representative data centers in Metro Atlanta, trying to understand, kind of what was the interaction between local property taxes, property tax abatement, and revenue generated. So we looked at several representative data centers, and we found that even with the typical abatement package being offered to data centers in Metro Atlanta, they're still generating significant property taxes for the local governing authorities, even with an abatement on them. So with that, I will turn it back over to Matt Taylor for what's next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pen? Yes.
I missed your name. I'm so sorry. What was?
I'm Greg Wilson from the University of Georgia.
Dr. Wilson? Okay. Well, very good to have you, Dr. Wilson. And Matt, I let you come up with any wrap comments. I mean, what I would like to do is, I think this is the most well-attended Ways and Means Committee meeting that we've ever had since I've become chairman. Quite amazing here. We do a lot of business today. I think I'd like to get kind of some feedback from the committee. I can guess that probably those last couple will be on the list, but maybe for us to reconvene and take a little deeper dive and maybe get some more questions answered. I'm guessing that's where most of the questions will come. If there's any outside of those last couple, or if there's anything anyone in particular has for Matt or the team, I would also ask if possible that maybe the analysts could hang around after the meeting if somebody has some more probing questions that could get answered as well.
I think that they can. We talked about a longer time frame. We'll be around.
That would be great, Matt. And I have no lights lit up, so it must be that we were, okay, here we go. All right, we've got a couple of questions. All right. And listen, if your hand's up, are these data center questions? Because we're going to come back together and dive deeper. We had some numbers change, and we had a number of people that wanted to testify there. So that is something I think will be at the top of the list on readdressing. But if you have a non-data center question, bump you, who's 22? Okay, all right. Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Blackman. My question is back to the University of Georgia presenter about the manufacturing investment tax credit. And just out of curiosity, when you're reviewing the economic activity on this, did you happen to break out by tier what the investments in the various tier counties? Because what we were trying to do when this code was last touched was trying to incent more investment in rural counties in Georgia. And it was broken down by tiers, and you referenced that, but I'm just wondering whether or not you could share with us or point to look at where, if our efforts were successful.
So I don't believe that we published that in the report, but we do have the credit utilization by county, so we're able to do some analysis on the tier. I'll be happy to work with the chairman to see if we can't assemble that data or maybe further answer that question offline.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Vice Chair Lady Stinson.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. McKay, I believe it was, that did the report from Georgia Southern. and he referenced death care services. So it's death care services. Can you share just a little more, expound more on what was your point about death care services and the taxes?
That we are not taxing, and very few other states are as well, taxing funeral homes and death care services. We use the NAICS code to define the how this tax credit works, since it was not outlined in law for that, and so that's why we included death care services. So the funeral homes and cemeteries.
Or not to pay?
They're not. We do not charge sales tax on those industries.
Because I pay sales tax. I'm a little confused. Well, I pay sales tax on the merchandise.
Yes.
Correct. That's the that was that.
Not your
I did not say. I did not make that point
Oh, yeah.
clearly. But yes, there on tangible personal property there is a potential to charge sales tax on those. But in terms of the actual service itself or any other service that's provided within that, those services are that the service side was what we focused on.
Okay, I got it. Thank you. Because I pay plenty of sales tax on merchandise to the state of Georgia.
Yes.
One of the things I think maybe to clarify is that the House has taken a position that we've looked at kind of a top down and scroll through most of these credits and exemptions based on the size and looking at the bigger ones and rotate down through as we get through the list. And I think one of the things that we noticed from the Senate request is they hit some of these services that are exempt currently, and so a little bit confusing there. So I can understand that. Chairman Williamson, are you?
I do have another question, and I can't remember who made the presentation about the rural hospital tax credit. If I could just ask you to step back and trying to understand this. You were referencing that donations were coming from Metro Atlanta area, obviously the highest concentration of wealth in the state.
Yes.
Were previously been you discounted the fact that those donations they started going to rural Georgia when this tax credit was implemented. But I hear you say your assumption was those donations were occurring every year prior to the rural hospital tax credit.
Yes, there's substantial data on donations to hospitals and healthcare, and it's a really large area of donations in the hundreds of millions. And so it's tough to see in that really large space the impact of the 75 million. But they have occurred in the past and are continuing currently.
Help me understand that, because prior to this tax credit, those were true donations, and the only thing the donor was getting it from it, assuming they were individual or a company, was they were able to expense that, or deduct it. So you effectively just got your taxes back on it. So, but in our rural hospital tax credit, it's really a redirect of your tax. You're really not giving anything. You're just saying rather than the money going to the Department of Revenue, it's going to go to the rural hospital. Is that
Correct, yes.
So there's really no donation. It's redirected taxes. So it was just interesting to hear you say that it wasn't the same degree. There were actual donations being made in Atlanta prior to this program coming into place. I would assume that would have stepped up even more activity coming out of the Atlanta area. Because more people would, let's say less wealthy people would say, well, I'm happy to redirect my taxes, but I don't have the $100,000 to give, or the whatever the number is, $5,000 to give to.
One of the parts of the analysis that we looked at closely was the income distribution of the donors. And in rural hospitals, as in a lot of these credits, the distribution of income skews, to the higher income individuals. So it is possible that people in the metro area said, "Oh, sure, I've got a little bit of money I'd like to give," and they did that. But in terms of the magnitude, we're thinking it was mostly, again, for the high donors, right?
Right.
got people planning their taxes and planning their donations and things that they're just kind of moving them from one place to
And
the other.
these were not coming from foundations. These were coming from either businesses or individuals. Correct. You're not look. You weren't overlaying nonprofits giving to the.
Correct. These are individuals or pass-through entities or corporations. Yeah.
Thank you for clearing that up for me.
Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bluestone, my question's for you too on the rural hospital tax credit. Did you look longitudinally to see how this is helping the hospitals? Because unlike maybe some of the other tax credits, this does have an explicit purpose and goal, which is to reduce the insolvency of our rural hospitals and to balance or to improve their balance sheet. So from 2017 to today, do we still have the same pool that are at risk or any less at risk? Like in other words, qualitatively, how is this doing? I understand the ROI aspect of it, but are fewer hospitals, to summarize, are fewer hospitals at risk now because of this, or are we about the same place?
We did not really delve into that level of specificity. We were really more interested in the level of giving. It's much more challenging for us to assess the impact of that giving on individual hospitals. There was a lot of comments made that the program did have beneficial effects to the individual hospitals that received the donations. But again, for our purposes, we're looking at how much, right? And so, and again, from where. But again, it does appear that from the comments that, to your point, that these are having benefits.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Buckner.
Don't go far. This is on the rural hospital tax credit as well. I'm just a little confused, and it just may be some of the wording, but it talked about it having a negative economic ROI because the state loses revenue. So I understand that they're not paying that revenue in as taxes, that it's going to the hospital instead. But aren't there some cost avoidances that could be factored in to show that while there might not be a real money benefit to the state, that we're saving jobs or we're adding jobs or we're taking care of healthcare needs that has some kind of added value?
So that's what we try to get at with the but-for issue, right? Essentially, and again, this looks at the state as a whole. Let me put this down. And so I think your point is well made, that for these individual hospitals and for these rural areas, the answer is yes, this is having a great impact. But it's coming from other parts of the state. So on net, that's what we're looking at. We can both be right, but on net for the whole state, that's where that ends up.
Okay, I got you. And there's no way for us to project anything about sustainability using this instead of some other funding source, I don't guess.
Sustainability in terms of
Taking care of the rural hospitals. Extrapolating, is this going to continue or is it going to stay the same?
Yeah, that would be a different analysis.
Thank you.
Matt, I believe I heard Dr. Bluestone mention that there would be some ease of administration if these may be more closely aligned with one another.
That's correct. We've had conversations. I mean, yeah, Dr. Bluestone and the Department of Revenue talked about the complexities and the confusion to taxpayers associated with these.
All right. Well, I don't have any further questions. We will invite you back, and Dr. Wilson, perhaps you as well. But we'll see what other ones kind of bubble up to the top and try to jump back in. But really grateful for y'all to take the time to be here today. I know most of you drove a little bit of a distance. Not you, Dr. Bluestone. You're pretty close, right? And thank everybody for sitting through some numbers discussions right after lunch. Much appreciated. If nobody has anything further for the good of the order, we stand adjourned.
anticipated is what I think they start every month. So it's a program to substitute